And it's a tough act to follow, I'll admit, but I'll do my best. And I think if we look back, I'm trying to take you back, way back. And we're exactly 1 month away from an event so significant in our calendar that a stage like this, an event like this would be needed to fully unpack what it really did, the single day, the single event in our history, and what it meant for us as a society and as a country. The 7th of July, 1990, Saba Saba. Right? A demonstration, protest, and statement to a single party state, Kenya at the time, on the fight and that clamor for multi-partyism. Now, we're looking ahead. This is Kenya, the next chapter. But if you ask me, I think we can borrow something from our Ghanaian brothers and sisters who say, in the Akan language, they have a word, sankofa, which means to reclaim our past so that we can understand our present and our future, to go back and find out how and why we are, where and who we are. And that's something I'd like to do with you, is allow us to go back and look with the lens of Saba Saba coming up, or the anniversary, the 24th anniversary of it coming up in just 1 month's time. What does that mean? And how have we changed since that time and now? So, these years ago, again, under the retired second president of this nation, Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, people fought. An intellectual movement was consolidated and formed about 8 years after the failed coup attempt. And they were hoping, intellectuals, professors, to stimulate this idea that we should not exist in a one-party state. And they paid a big price for it. They paid a price sometimes we don't fully acknowledge, sometimes we don't fully realize. The media, or the medium, that they used that time was leaflets. Small leaflets like the Mzalendo, the Patriot, right, being circulated and being passed around. And it begs the question, was social media then the discussions that happened in bars, in churches, at funerals, at Harambee, at all of these different public and private places amongst concerned citizens trying to change the destiny of their country at the time? The president at the time actually described many of them as bearded social and political misfits. And that was the actual phrase he used to describe them. To the extent that one school teacher who happened to have, a lot of them were intellectuals, they were the lecturers in the universities, again, detained lawfully or unlawfully, some cases abducted. There's a good body of history around what happened at this time, and in many cases tortured too. But what happened at the time is for the likes of Paddy Onyango, Katama Mkangi, and others, many, many others who were taken during this time, is that it was their spirit that they were trying to break, and this ideology they were trying to suppress. And yet, years later, during the Moi era, we saw multipartyism come into play. And as the years of Moi began to wane, we began to see self-expression take on new meaning, when an artist called Gordon Ompembwa, also known to us affectionately as Gado, was able to draw a gap-toothed man in the newspaper who happened to be our president, when a show by the name of Ridiculous actually put that same president in a pair of shorts with a belly and a dance and his beloved cane in his right hand, giving us one of his rousing speeches. That was where we got to in the Moi era. And social media per se hadn't started, but it was there, the idea, the concept, laying there in our fabric of our history, which, should we reclaim, we can look back at today and tomorrow and the next 1 month perhaps, and come up with ideas of what the future holds. So towards the end of this tenure, in the political campaigns, for the musicians, for the media, besides the leaflets, on the opposite spectrum was the Voice of Kenya, what became known later as the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, a state corporation that we can all hum the tune to various bits, and you can all sing the Happy Birthday song if you're Generation Y, most likely. Now, there was also the musicians at the time, and one in particular, a gentleman who was having left what was then one of the biggest boy bands of the 90s, had put out an album called Sawa Sawa, and he had this song, a provocative song, a song that actually got it banned on the airwaves. Mchia Kitu Kidogo, that singer, that musician was Eric Wainaina. And when he put out the song, it showed the extent to which corruption was our problem, up to us, and systemic within us as Kenyans. And the establishment didn't like that. On the flip side, for music, there was two young, impressionable men who, for one particular album cover, used more baby oil than I think has ever been used in the history of our country. You know who I'm talking about. Two guys, that front cover, the six-pack, oh goodness. I'm talking about Gidi Gidi Maji Maji, and their one hit, the one anthem that the Rainbow Coalition and 60% of our country rallied behind at the ballot to change the tables, to change the tale that had preceded us of that time, of the Moi era, right? And the song, the chant, it would have been a hashtag if it was this day and age. Who can bogo me? Who can? I said, who can? Okay, you gotta say this on this next part, you gotta say, Okay, I'll take it one more time, because I can see you guys, it's bringing up that nostalgia in you. Who can? Who can? I said, who can? I am a And that was the chant at every political rally you can imagine across the country. With the entire country, the opposition united like never before. Ethnic lines completely not even seen, because we were united in purpose. And that purpose was to bring about a serious change in the top office of this country. And we moved on to the Kibaki years, or the Rainbow Coalition years, and things changed. And so from just KBC and of what was formerly the VOK, we had a lot more licenses passed out, and we saw ethnic radio stations for the variety of tribes in the country pop up, to huge success. We saw a lot of new players bring new content to Kenyans, right? Not just Esmeralda. And this age was important too, because freedom of speech was unlike any other time we had seen before. But more importantly, the internet was actually slowly taking shape. It was dial-up. For those of you who lived in the right area outside the town, it was ADSL, but it was slow. And that's the universal thing about it. But slowly but surely, that and the changing tide in politics, the economic growth we witnessed, in addition to the corruption and scandal, these things fought at each other. And whether it was John Gidongo revealing mass corruption on a scale unlike which we had ever expected, but history hadn't really been wrong to say that it was there in the Moi era, it was present in the Kibaki era too, mass corruption and so on. But another thing was chugging and plugging slowly away, and that was the internet. And pre-2007, 2008, we had mobile phones, we had a couple networks, people were buying SIM cards for 2,500 shillings. God knows what they were sending SMSs for, I don't remember. But the thing was, technology was getting into our hands, our pockets, and our homes, at least for a small section of the population. And what that began to do, even in music, even in how we expressed ourselves, was it began to change things. Gearing up towards the election of 2007, 2008, the internet played a role, with the diaspora getting very involved, a lot of emails being forwarded, a lot of SMSs, particularly in the post-election period. And before that, fueling it, as the two opposing camps split the country in two. At that time, bloggers, or the early adopters of content, the content creators, if you like, the people who first joined Twitter when it came out and others like that, they, at this point, had been congregating virtually. They had been moving on from the previous leaflets and perhaps even the state newspapers and so on to self-publishing. And they were sharing their thoughts, and they were meeting, again, those bars and those homes and those different sections and places. And social media was taking on shape of its own without social networks, much of what we've come to know social media to be today. And at that time, even the co-founders of what would eventually become Ushahidi met virtually at this point on forums like Mashada.com or Kenya Unlimited, or the Kenya Bloggers Webring, for those who were active or around at the time. And what this led to was the beginnings of that, Ushahidi, a globally recognized company now, an innovation that Kenya is incredibly proud of. At the same time, too, M-Pesa had just started, not too long before that, and during the post-election violence, actually, was used to transmit and send and keep people with airtime, no matter where they were in the country, and actually with some form of income, even as the country was at an impasse. And so that's where we found ourselves, in the contrast of this Moi era, in this one period, this one stage in our history, where the country was torn in two, and we're trying to find peace and trying to reconcile. Years later, we would not only pass a constitution, but more importantly, perhaps not more importantly, but of similar importance, if I may, the high-speed undersea cables made landfall in Mombasa and began to work their way inland at the expense of many of the telecommunications companies we use today. And what that brought with it, besides better access to music, besides a lot of burnt CDs at Kenya Cinema and places like that, and local music was harder to find, if I may say so myself, was it brought and democratized music, it democratized media, it democratized self-expression. And in the early days, it allowed people to see the internet and experience it, and experience personal technology and all that it would afford them. These same bloggers were rabble-rousers, as the second term of Kibaki would prove, and they would instigate things. And even as we went to the ICC, a number of these bloggers went and were under fire for revealing whether it was the identities of such people or coming under fire for defamation. And we saw historical examples of where self-expression in the internet age was really just pushing and pushing at us. And these moments, just archived in time, made an impression on the young minds, most importantly, that might not be in this room or are present, but are the ones that were sensitized and came of age in an age where they can speak how they want, because authority and speaking your mind is different to the 90s, it's different to 1990. And so who would be those bearded social and political misfits of this age? It would be the people who spoke out, it would be the people who expressed themselves politically and otherwise, and took up their right to self-publish and to share things online, for better and for worse. And for music, it was Nonini, it was Mercy Myra, it was K-South, it was Kalamashaka in the earlier days. But better still, a very interesting thing happened, especially after 2007, 2008. It was closer to 2010 actually. And that was the coming to life of a gentleman we know now by one name, Makmende, Africa's first viral sensation. And that wasn't without its cause and effect, and it took just the band, the actual performers behind this song, to world acclaim. It was on the front cover of, I don't know, the Wall Street Journal Online, Fast Company, the web ate it up. Africa's first viral sensation. They loved every minute of it. You know, with his tie around his head and all the Generation Y references, which will pass over the heads of many people. But this single-handedly created an icon for this present generation. And so years later, when instead of in December of 2012, in March 2013, we would usher in an entirely new age, one where there were political candidates describing themselves perhaps as digital or analog, and entire governments which have gone on to describe themselves as such. That's the age we're living in now. And in that age, the question becomes, you and the power you have to express yourself, with the next month to come, for example, in an age where Tujuane tells us a lot more about who we are and how we express ourselves than any conversation, any honest heart-to-heart conversation on a stage and in an exchange like this might. What does that say about how far we've come? And what does it say that when members of parliament decide to raise their salaries as the first order of business, and people called to action by one man, a man who's no stranger to controversy, with having heckled the president himself in 2009 and 2011 when the price of flour was going up, Boniface Mwangi called people to Freedom Corner for what was known as #Occupy Parliament. And he made a statement, and some of you may or may not have been there, but you all likely saw it. Pigs, actual pigs, just demonstrating the greed and largesse of our political servants, if you like, and their will to add more to their already hefty price tags and hefty compensation packages. But again, a statement made and where technology particularly was used to galvanize what is otherwise a collectivist or an armchair activist middle class to the streets, to take in big breaths of tear gas, to take in the likely threat of perhaps assault or perhaps some kind of aggravation with or exchange with members of law enforcement. And that change heralded much, much more with it. And as we welcomed our new president in, and this age, as Jeff may have mentioned in the report, of social television, as we describe it, as many other practitioners in the industry do, we are looking at an unprecedented opportunity where, unlike the 1990s, where it may have been a leaflet, it may have been a placard, now perhaps it's 140 characters that makes the statement on the 7th of July. Perhaps it's a physical movement of people down from Freedom Corner all the way down into the city center. But whichever shape it takes, the one thing it will take is your feet moving from one place to the other, and most importantly, us looking back to look at the present and to own it. The challenge of social media has been many times we actually follow people very similar to us, only get views very similar to our own, only interact with people very aligned to us. And if anything, the web is creating a filter bubble, if you like, around you. And so where are those people who the president or the retired president would have called in your circle, the people you disagree with? How often do you see them? Some of those bloggers I mentioned earlier now sit in State House. They sit with law enforcement here and advise the Inspector General, amongst other very influential people of the government today. You may have seen that even more recently, someone tell that hashtag and just its use to galvanize people as a digital army defending patriotism somehow, virtually. So the Botswana foreign minister says they won't allow our president in because of his standing trial or case at the International Criminal Court. And Kenyans descend on every Botswanan they can find online to crash them, all right? So Nigeria don't give our football team the right kind of training facility, and a journalist reports this. And so someone tells Nigeria starts, and it becomes Africa's biggest online exchange of fire. By the way, for the record, we were beaten, but no Kenyan believes that. I have the data to prove it, but I'll say it on this stage because I can back it up. No Kenyan believes me though, and I'll probably get flagged for that. What am I doing? Someone tells South Africa is the most recent one, where the sports minister there happened to say, as the South African administration is often known for saying, actually, speaking ill of other African countries, we don't send our athletes to drown in pools like Kenya. And so Kenyans descended on every South African they could find. And yet, when we come closer to home, you still find the cracks, the things that would have stopped people from appearing on the 7th of July in 1990, those ethnic tensions, those subtle differences, creeping onto Facebook posts, creeping onto Twitter messages, creeping onto hashtags, creeping into comedy, because we laugh at our differences, but perhaps we've not seen the same unity in purpose as we did in 2002. And so the question remains, if we're so focused on looking forward, if we're so focused at what the next big thing is, I don't believe it's going to be technology. I don't believe it's going to be any revolutionary change in the devices. It will be incremental, so change is expected and constant. But most likely, it will be something triggered and born from our pasts, from our collective identities, or lack thereof, and it will be an icon. I'm not saying it's Lupita Nyong'o, but hey, she's there. And she is doing something for this present generation too, and the generation to come. And so the one thing that remains, we have 1 month, exactly 1 month, to the 7th of July. And I don't know whether people will be on the streets. I don't know what the opposition has planned. I don't know what to expect. But I know one thing is for sure, that to look at this next chapter, we need to think and remember this idea of the sankofa, which, if you've seen before, illustrated, is of a bird flying in one direction, but still keeping its head tuned in the other one to see and fully take in where it's come from and where it is at the present. Thank you.